Welcome back to Art with Mrs. Connors. Today we are doing part 2 of our line design drawing and painting. But before we do, we are going to do a little bit of color theory. The materials you are going to need are coffee filters, plain old paper like printer paper, markers. You want to make sure that they are washable markers and not permanent markers. You're going to need either your watercolor paper or mixed media paper. You're going to need a spray bottle with water. I'm just using a little spray bottle that I had left over from my stepdaughter's detangled spray. I just rinsed it out a bit. And then you also want your messy mat, because we are going to be making messes. Now, the important part about this entire project is making sure that you color on your coffee filters on top of copy paper or printer paper, because the coffee filters are thin, and anytime that you color on top of them, that color from the markers is just going to go right on through onto whatever surface you were coloring on. That's why I recommend working on top of printer paper. This way the marker bleeds through onto the printer paper and not onto your messy mat, and you're not going to be getting colors mixed up. Now when we finish, we are going to be having a coffee filter that is all cool and tie-dyed, and then our paper, our watercolor or our mixed media paper, is going to be the same. Now, up on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see I have a thing called a color wheel. And a color wheel is a tool that artists use to help them know the different colors. And you can see here I've got a simpler one. They are essentially kind of in rainbow order, because rainbow order is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to work with the primary colors. So we call them the primary colors because they are colors that you cannot create by mixing colors. So I'm going to be using my 3 primary colors to show what happens when you mix them together. So I'm creating 3 pie slices. So the beginning part almost looks like a Y when I did it with the yellow, and now with the red I'm going to be drawing another line. You can see that as I'm coloring close to my line, I'm making sure to color nice and neatly and try to get a lot of color. But then as I go farther away from that line, you can see that my coloring is a little bit more scribbled, and that's okay. I just want to make sure that I have a lot of color close to my lines. Then as I get farther away, it's okay to be messy. You can see that I'm pointing out to my placemat below me and how the color kind of bled through. So I moved my coffee filter elsewhere on my placemat so I don't end up getting the colors mixed. So here again, I'm trying to make sure that I'm coloring nice and neatly as I'm close to the line. And then as I get farther away, I'm getting a little bit more messy, and I'm kind of spreading out my colors a little bit more because I don't really need to be super neat. Now that I'm going in with the dark, I'm going in with the blue. It doesn't really matter if I'm overlapping with another color on my placemat because the blue kind of covers it up a little bit. Now if you look in the corner, I've had this sign, snap that cap, where it's a marker and it's showing to snap the cap. You want to make sure that when you put the cap back on your marker, you hear that snap or that click. So the next part, I'm putting my coffee filter on top of my watercolor paper. I can either have it in the middle or off to the side, depending on if I wanted to use the paper for other things. Skipping ahead, now I'm going to start spraying my coffee filter with water. I'm making sure to pay extra close attention to those lines, and you can already start to see that the color is starting to bleed a little bit. It's starting to blend together. So it's skipping ahead. You can see I've sprayed a lot of water, and the colors are starting to bleed a bit more. You can see some purple in the blue and the red. So I'm going to put this to the side for now. You can see even just moving it, the colors are kind of moving in, and it looks pretty cool. I get my hands pretty dirty with this, so you want to make sure you wash your hands. So going back to the color wheel one that I had already colored this one. You're going to do it one yourself. We are going to see what happens when we spray this. Now again, the color wheel, we're going to actually break it down in half. So if we were to focus on one half at a time, we're going to see that there's cool colors and warm colors. So for me, the warm colors kind of remind me of fire because they're bright, they feel very warm, they look like fire colors because fire has like reds and oranges and yellows. Then this other side, these colors are called cool colors. A lot of times people will use them to paint things such as water or maybe use them in shadows because they have a more cool kind of a feel to them. So now we're going to spray it with water and see what happens when they bleed together. So looking here, you can see that the colors are starting to blend together a little bit. I'm going to spray a little bit more so that way it really pushes those colors. But if you look at the green especially, you can see that the green is moving into the yellow and it's starting to lighten up a little bit. Meanwhile, where the green and the blue meet, it gets a little darker. So the next aspect of color that we are going to focus on is called complementary colors, or colors that are opposite of each other. So if we look at our color wheel, if we were to look at the color orange, if you look directly across the color wheel from orange, you will see that the color across from it is blue. This is called its complementary color. Complementary colors help each other to stand out. They provide automatic contrast. Contrast is again where you make things stand out. When I remember complementary colors, I try to think of things to help me remember them. So red and green, I think about Christmas because those are two colors that are always used at Christmas time. Blue and orange, I am a Syracuse football fan. Some people might be New York Mets fans. Those two teams use the colors blue and orange. If you think about yellow and purple, you might think about Easter. Some people are sports fans and think about the LA Lakers. So we're going to put these colors, these coffee filters, on top of our watercolor paper again, and we're going to spray it with water and see what happens. As the colors mixed, you notice that they're starting to blend a bit more, and the green and red are starting to turn a little brown. So we're going to try this again with our orange and blue and see what happens. So again, I'm focusing on spraying the middle first. I'm focusing on that line where the two colors are meeting. And you can see the blue is already starting to bleed into the orange, and it's getting that brown muddy color just like the red and green did. So we're going to put this off to the side, and then we're going to focus on our last one, which is the purple and yellow. I think purple and yellow show the best example of what happens when opposite colors mix because of the fact that these two colors are a really dark and a really light. So again, I'm spraying really well in the middle, and then I'm watching to see the purple is starting to come through. And if you look at the color that I pointed to below, it looks brown. It's that muddy color that we don't really like. So all three, by the time that we're done in that middle section, will have a little bit of that muddy browny color. And you can see up there, it's mixing even more so because I tilted the paper a little bit as I was moving it, and some of that dark bled over to the other side. Alrighty, so we had a lot of fun color mixing. When we're all done, your paper is going to be dry, and you're going to be able to peel it off, and you'll see this really cool tie-dye looking paper. And we'll be able to use this paper for a future project. I hope you had fun and learned a lot about color. Alrighty, we are up to my favorite part of this project, and that is painting. We are going to be doing what's called a wax resist. We are going to be painting with our Tempera Cakes on top of our oil pastel Drawing. So before we do, let me show you our materials. We're going to be painting, so we want to make sure we have the right kind of paint. These paints are called Tempera Cakes, and they act kind of like a watercolor paint where you need water to wake it up. If I were to try to paint with this right now, see, I'm not getting any sort of paint on my paintbrush because these are very dry. Same thing for these ones. If I were to try to paint, look, no paint is coming off of them. So you have to wake these up with water just like you would with watercolors. Now, these are two different brands. As you can see, these ones are made by a company called Prang. I like these ones because of the bright colors. When you paint with them, they are very rich colors. If we look at this example, we can see although the colors are nice and bright, if we look at the oil pastel, it's a little hard to see. So we're not going to use this particular brand of Tempera Cakes, even though these are my absolute favorite, just because we want to make sure that our oil pastels are well seen in our drawings. So for this project, I'm using this brand of Tempera Cake because I like the bright colors, but we are not going to be using black or white because that'll make the colors a little bit muddy. So these are the two colors that we are not going to use for this project. Other materials you will want to use are a messy mat, as we have been using. You also want to use a tray of some sort and a cup for water. Then these are my favorite paintbrushes because they have a wide variety of mark making abilities. So this is going to be your setup. You're going to have your line drawing on top of a messy mat. Now when painting with watercolors or Tempera Cakes, you want to follow this sign that says dip, wipe, swirl, or swipe. So you're going to dip your paintbrush in your water, wipe off the extra, wipe or swirl or swipe in the paint to get it all filled up with paint. And now that it has a lot of paint on here, I'm going to paint on my paper. I want to make sure I stay away from the areas that I have yellow because I want this to stand out. So this area that I have yellow orange, it's okay to paint because it's far enough away from yellow. It has that little bit of orange, so it makes it a little darker, but I'm not going to paint in the areas that I have pure yellow. So I'm going to speed up this process so that way you can see what it looks like when it is all done. Alright, here I've switched colors. So you can see I'm making sure not to paint over that red swirl because red paint on red oil pastel, it's not going to show up. Now if you notice, there are a couple of areas that I drew with a white oil pastel, and that is starting to show up more. So it's skipping ahead. You can see at this point my water is pretty dirty. That's why I'm working with my dark color, my purple, because it's okay that my water is a little dirty. It's not going to really affect that particular color. Alrighty, I'm all done. You can see all the areas that I have colored with different colors. The oil pastel is showing through. This is a really cool magic trick that happens with oil pastel and when you are using a water-based paint such as watercolor paints or Tempera Cakes where it requires water to paint with because the wax shows through the painted areas. Next, we are going to learn how to clean our brushes because as artists, we need to know how to take care of our materials. So this graphic shows you the different steps on how to clean your paintbrush. And I'm going to be linking this in the description. And now I'm going to show you how it's done. Alright, so here at my sink, I'm going to first dump out my water because my water is super dirty. And now I'm going to use my cup again, so I'm just going to rinse this out really fast. Just give it a quick little rinse, maybe a second time, just to make sure that all that water is out. And I'm going to put it to the side. Next, even though I rinsed out my brush beforehand in my water cup, you can see looking at it, oh my goodness, look at all that paint that's still in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of soap. I find that dish soap works the best for this. And I'm going to swirl it around. Look at all that paint that is coming out of that paintbrush. And this is with me rinsing it out in my water cup. Look how dirty that is. So I'm going to swirl, 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 swirl for maybe about 30 seconds, a minute. You want to make sure that a lot of the paint has come out and that soap is starting to look a little, you'd start to see a little of those white parts. Now, under the running water, I am swirling my paintbrush in my hand, and I'm using the paintbrush to help get some of that soap out. And I'm using my fingers to just make sure that I got any extra paint that might be still in there. If my water in my sink is coming out clear when it runs through my paintbrush, I know that I am all good. So next, I'm going to I'm going to do it again just to make sure that I got all paint out. And you can see the soap looks so much cleaner now. I'm not seeing any color coming out, so I think I did a good job. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes, well, a couple more seconds of scrubbing. And you can see the paintbrush and the soap all looks white. Here I'm rinsing it out in my hand again and using that paintbrush to help not only get the soap out of the brush, but also off of my hand. I'm using my fingers to get any extra water out of the paintbrush and to make sure the bristles are nice and flat. Then I'm going to grab a paper towel. Next, we're going to grab a paper towel and we are going to put it next to the sink to keep our paintbrush lying flat. And we do this because if we were to have it stand up, all the water that was left in the bristles would come down into that metal part where the bristles are glued in place, and it'll break down the glue. Sometimes I like to give my paintbrush a little drying by doing little X's on my paper towel before lying it flat. And then I'll just give the bristles a little brushing. When we come back for part 3, we are going to be learning all about shapes and how to design a monster using basic shapes. And we're going to be drawing this on our line painting that we just created. So come back and watch part 3 when your painting is all dry.